We're tracking multiple waves of cold air moving in, which will increase the chances for wintry weather across parts of the nation. This is certainly a complex weather pattern to forecast over the next couple of weeks as we head into early December. And speaking of December, we'll be discussing it in detail in this video. My name is Mitch. A very good Friday morning to you. I hope you're all having a fantastic start to your day. I know I am, because it's Friday. I imagine most of us are feeling pretty good, right? If you haven't already, please subscribe, and be sure to like the video if you enjoy it. And if there's anything I can keep in my thoughts and prayers for you, please leave a comment below. Alright, let's get started with our forecast this morning, beginning with the latest from the Climate Prediction Center. We'll cover the temperature outlook first, followed by any potential for winter weather, and then we'll take a deeper dive into December. First up, here is the 6 to 10-day temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center. This forecast from the experts covers the period from the 26th through the 30th, right around the Thanksgiving timeframe and into the following week. Now, if you're in these areas shaded in blue, that indicates a higher probability of below-average temperatures. If you live in the warmer shades, like the oranges and even some reds appearing on the map, that's where the forecast favors above-average temperatures for this period. So, as you can see, a significant portion of the northern Rockies, much of the central U.S., and a large section of the East are all forecast for below-average or near-normal temperatures. Meanwhile, areas across the Southeast are trending toward above-average temperatures. Now, if we extend this to the 8 to 14-day temperature outlook, which runs from the 28th through the 4th of December, you'll notice as we head into December, a large part of the country is favored to be below average, temperature-wise. At least, there's a chance for it. The Southeast, however, is holding on to that warmth thanks to a persistent southeastern ridge. We'll discuss that ridge in more detail later in the video and explain why it's sticking around. But again, a vast area of the country has a shot at below-average temperatures. Now, I want to quickly show you this next graphic. We won't spend much time on it. This is the week 3 to 4 temperature outlook. This was issued 1 week ago, so a new version is scheduled for release today, later this afternoon. And frankly, I am very eager to see the update, as it will cover the period from December 5th through approximately the 19th. This current map shows the 29th through the 12th. And again, that's because it was issued a week ago. But the new one, as I mentioned, will cover the 5th through the 19th of December. This forecast extends beyond the model ensemble guidance I'm about to show you. So the big question is, will it show a signal for breaking down this ridge? I'm certainly hoping it does, because we don't want to spend a large part of December with above-average temperatures in the Southeast. That is, unless you happen to be a big fan of warm weather. Perhaps you're not concerned with colder temperatures or the chances for winter weather around the holidays. Personally, I am definitely hoping for a colder holiday period. It just adds to the festive atmosphere, don't you think? Now, let's see what the models are showing to support this Climate Prediction Center forecast. We'll begin by looking at the European AI ensemble, starting next Wednesday, the 26th. As you can see on the map, these warmer colors indicate above-average temperatures. Conversely, the cooler colors, the blues and greens you're seeing, represent below-average temperatures. So, simply put, warm versus cold compared to the seasonal average. This pattern begins to set up on Thanksgiving Eve. It appears we'll be tracking a significant cold front sweeping across the nation. The model guidance is now in strong agreement on this primary cold front, a system we've been discussing extensively over the past week. The European model, in particular, has been consistent with this forecast and hasn't wavered. Other models are now falling in line, which points to a rather chilly Thanksgiving Day for the central and eastern U.S. That's because this cold front will be pushing through the region from Thanksgiving Eve into Thanksgiving Day itself. So, the forecast now calls for a cold Thanksgiving across the eastern U.S., a change from what we were seeing about a week ago. At that time, a colder holiday didn't seem likely, but the data has shifted. Now, notice this area of green on the map. That signifies temperatures anywhere from 10 to 15 degrees below normal, setting up a chilly November 28th. For the final weekend of November, the eastern U.S. will hold on to those below-average temperatures. However, we will see some moderation, with temperatures trending back closer to normal for this time of year. But then, a strong signal emerges for a significant blast of cold air arriving on the last day of November. It's expected to drop south right through the middle of the country, and this aligns with what we're observing in the higher latitudes. There's a great deal of atmospheric blocking in place, which supports this forecast. We've been discussing how warming in the polar region can dislodge frigid air, and this pattern appears to confirm that. A major Arctic frontal boundary looks to plunge down through the nation's midsection, with a surge of Arctic air right behind it. We're talking temperatures 15 to 20, perhaps even 25 degrees below average. This means some truly deep Arctic air is set to dive south late next week and into the final weekend of November. Now, in response to such a deep trough digging into the west-central U.S., this will cause the ridge in the east to build. Think of it like a trampoline. When you push down in the center, the edges lift up. That's essentially what the atmosphere is doing. You have a deep trough diving south through the middle of the country, which in turn forces the southeastern ridge to strengthen. So, after the cold front passes, a rapid warm-up is expected as we kick off December. As a result, we'll see above-average temperatures begin to dominate the eastern U.S., and temperatures will get quite warm, creating a sharp temperature gradient over the Midwest and south-central U.S. On one side, you'll have well below average temperatures across the nation's interior. On the other, you'll have temperatures several degrees above average across the east. Now, as we move a few days into December, the question is, does that cold air push eastward, breaking down the ridge? The models suggest it will. Looking at our final forecast frame, you can see that cold air begins to spill back into the northeast, signaling another pattern change on the horizon. Alright, we'll need to keep a close watch on this. Taking a look at an operational run from the European AI model here, we'll begin the forecast on Tuesday, November 26th. And you'll notice that first cold front making its move. This will create an opportunity for some below freezing temperatures, particularly in the morning hours. In fact, this brings us right into Thanksgiving Eve and Thanksgiving Day, so expect a chilly holiday. It's certainly going to be a cold one. Thanksgiving falls on the 27th this year. Now, as we push into Friday morning, you can see some very chilly temperatures spreading across the eastern U.S., though nothing out of the ordinary. This appears to be a typical late November cold front. Now, advancing the forecast, we're looking at another cool weekend ahead, which will be the final weekend of November. Following that, a significant mass of cold air will drop south across the central part of the country around the 30th. This pattern continues into December 1st. For instance, looking at the morning of December 1st, note the below-zero temperatures plunging into the Rockies. While this is just one model run, observe the sharp temperature gradient stretching into Texas. We're seeing temperatures in the single digits in the Texas Panhandle, while they remain in the 70s along the Texas coastline on the morning of December 1st. This indicates a significant push of cold air southward. However, the southeast ridge will then begin to build, leading to warmer than average temperatures. You can clearly identify the influence of that ridge based on these temperatures. A very cold air mass is in play. This takes us to the morning of the 3rd. And although this is an extended forecast, it aligns well with the projected upper-level wind pattern. A substantial amount of cold air is diving into the central U.S. Now, let's turn our attention to potential storm system. I'm not placing a high emphasis on any single solution yet, as the model guidance shows considerable variability. However, as we head into Thanksgiving week, specifically on Tuesday, we do have a storm system sweeping across the eastern U.S. I anticipate this will be primarily a rain event. I am monitoring a stronger piece of energy in the northern stream, a 998 millibar low, which could bring snow on its colder side. The extent of that cold air remains uncertain. This system is timed for the 26th, placing it right around Thanksgiving. We will see cold air pushing through with this system, but no major organized storms are expected. Still, we are watching a system in the upper Midwest. For those in the upper Great Lakes region, this is a system to watch a day or two before Thanksgiving. It does not appear to be a well-phased system at this time. Then, as we move toward the 28th, and then the 29th, an Arctic boundary could begin to drop south, bringing a significant mass of Arctic air with it. There is also some moisture associated with this front, giving us a forecast window of about a week to 8 days. Looking ahead, an Arctic boundary is set to drop south, and the Euro AI model indicates a significant amount of moisture will accompany it. This brings us toward the 30th, and into the 1st of the month. While we shouldn't focus on the exact timing just yet, the model is projecting a dynamic setup. When these Arctic boundaries interact with even a small amount of moisture, it can lead to significant impacts. So, if this moisture does materialize with the approaching front, we could be looking at a major, widespread winter storm to either close out November or kick off December. However, for many areas, this will be all rain, and we could even see some thunderstorms across the southeast. Moving into the second and third of the month, we're extending into the long range, where details become less certain. Now, let's take a look at the standard Euro model. It shows a similar trend starting around Tuesday. Scattered moisture is present across the eastern US, but by Wednesday, conditions turn quieter for most of the country. It doesn't project the same intensity for that northern system as the Euro AI model, but as we look further out, it does eventually develop a system. The timing is simply a day or two behind the Euro AI, and it does indicate some potential for snow. Perhaps by next Friday, a week from now, we could see some activity across Minnesota affecting cities like Minneapolis and Milwaukee. Chicago could also be in the path of a fast-moving Clipper system, and the Euro model also shows energy linked with that cold Arctic air. However, the solution is certainly not as dramatic as what the Euro AI model is suggesting. This projection extends to the morning of December 1st, depicting a weaker system in the north. At this range, the model guidance is still working to resolve the overall pattern, so it's premature to focus too intensely on specifics, such as individual winter storm signals. Shifting to the Euro ensemble for a broader view, and looking out to Thanksgiving morning on Thursday, there is no significant signal for snowfall. However, as we extend the forecast through the full model run, which takes us out to approximately the 5th of December, you can see the potential for activity really starts to increase between Thanksgiving and December 5th. This aligns with the expected pattern evolution, but it's important to note this is not a specific snow forecast. For example, if you're in Amarillo, this doesn't guarantee 2 to 3 inches of snow. This is a model ensemble, not a specific forecast. Now, turning our attention to the eastern US, we'll start again with Thanksgiving morning, which shows little signal for snow, but then you'll notice the Great Lakes region, particularly the lake-effect snowbelts, begin to show activity as cold Arctic air moves in. This is a logical outcome, as cold air passing over the Great Lakes will likely generate lake-effect snow. Extending this outlook to around the 5th of the month, you can see that the potential for wintry weather increases. For the southeast, however, chances for early season winter weather remain very low. Typically, the South doesn't experience significant winter weather in December. However, as we move into the latter half of the month, that pattern could begin to shift. This all fits the developing pattern quite well. Notice the blue shading that represents a trough of low pressure, which will usher colder air southward. This area of lower pressure can sometimes generate a storm system, although it's not a guarantee. Now, notice this area of higher pressure right here, which will naturally drive colder air southward. This pattern is what will usher in that colder air. It's a logical progression with blocking high pressure to the north. This dislodges Arctic air, funneling it into this trough. Consequently, a following cold front will bring a chilly air mass late next week and into our Thanksgiving period. After that system moves out, the pattern begins to reset. But what comes next? Another significant trough is forecast to dig into the western and central US, and this development is consistent with the overall pattern. That's because a strong negative EPO is setting up a blocking pattern over Alaska, which will displace cold air southward into this trough. You can see that represented by this blue shading, which could also spawn a storm system. However, it's important to note, a persistent ridge is building across the eastern US. Remember, as a trough digs deeply, it forces the atmosphere around it to rise. That's precisely what we're seeing here. As the trough deepens, the adjacent ridges build higher. So, as one area goes down, the other sides go up, much like jumping on a trampoline. Imagine the slow motion effect on a trampoline. As you go down, the areas around you lift up. That's essentially the mechanics of the upper air weather pattern. With such a deep trough in place, this is the resulting atmospheric response. Looking ahead, this entire blue-shaded area indicates the potential for a developing storm system. Regardless, it will certainly usher in a significant mass of cold air thanks to a developing cross-polar flow. For this pattern to change, we would need to see a negative NAO, or blocking, establish over Greenland. That blocking would be the key to breaking down this eastern ridge, but at the moment, that feature is completely absent. However, as we move toward the end of this model run, a few days into December, around December 3rd, some ridging still holds on in the southeast, but you can see the trough begins a slow progression eastward. It's a very gradual shift, attempting to push farther east, yet even at the end of the forecast period, several days into December, that stubborn southeast ridge remains. Still, this overall pattern does suggest the potential return of blocking in Greenland, indicating a negative NAO phase. At the same time, ridging persists over Alaska and the western U.S., which will maintain a continuous feed of cold air to the south. The key question is the exact track of this cold air. For the eastern U.S. and the southeast, the challenge is breaking down this ridge. Can it be eroded, allowing some of that cold air affecting the rest of the country to move in? To look beyond this time frame, extending deeper into December, we can turn to the European weekly forecasts. These models pick up right where the operational runs end, and once again, we see a similar setup. A large reservoir of cold air is plunging southward into the lower 48, facilitated by blocking high pressure and a deep diving trough. This trough is quite broad and elongated, allowing for a continuous feed of cold air to funnel into it. The critical forecast question becomes the placement of the storm track if this pattern materializes several days into December. These low-pressure systems will likely track in this general fashion, or perhaps like this. This subtle ridge will maintain the warmer temperatures across the southeast, but as we advance in the forecast, we can see that ridging begin to recede as a more prominent ridge builds out west, while a trough starts to dig in over the northeast and the Ohio Valley, as well as the Midwest and parts of the Mid-Atlantic. Now, we still see that ridge's influence right here, so I believe this setup will promote Alberta clippers diving down into this region, which could tap into some southern moisture. But as we progress further into the forecast, heading toward mid-December, a period we've been discussing, it appears that the southeastern ridge finally breaks down as we get into the middle of the month. To put it simply, we have ridging in the west and a trough establishing itself in the east, though it's not particularly deep. Of course, this is far out in the forecast, so we don't expect the models to resolve this with perfect accuracy. The details are often smoothed out at this range, but this is a more promising look. We have blocking developing in the higher latitudes. This allows a feed of cold air to surge southward, so the pattern certainly looks more favorable as we approach Christmas. A much more favorable pattern indeed. So, how does this translate to our surface temperatures? While there's still uncertainty, we can examine the guidance to see what the temperature anomalies might look like. During the first week of December, from the 1st through the 8th, the trend is toward above-average temperatures across the Deep South. However, at the same time, most of the country will be experiencing below-average temperatures. A sharp temperature gradient will likely set up right through this region, which is consistent with the trough's position. I anticipate we'll be dealing with a dramatic temperature gradient to start December, and unfortunately, for cold and winter weather enthusiasts in the Deep South and Southeast, the month is poised to begin on the warm side. The data clearly reflects this. Now, as we approach the mid-month timeframe, we see these above-average temperatures begin to recede. Then, as we get closer to Christmas, specifically the week before, it appears the eastern U.S. will transition into these blue shades during the second half of December, representing below-average temperatures. So, let's now turn our attention to the potential snowfall signal. Between now and December 5th, this is the outlook for the central U.S. But notice what happens as we extend this out to the 21st. The entire pattern shifts southward, and these areas begin to see more widespread potential. It's a similar story for the eastern U.S., where the signal isn't particularly strong outside of the typically favored areas in the northeast. And it is quite possible the northeast could see some significant winter weather. For those of you in the northeast, if you think I'm sounding pessimistic for winter weather fans, that's actually not the case. Your region is in a somewhat favorable position with this upcoming pattern, more so than the upper Midwest and the Great Lakes. This pattern favors your area, but there will be a distinct gradient in play, separating less favorable from more favorable zones, and the key will be determining which side of that line you are on to start December. The Northeast could see some significant snowfall, depending on your location, between now and the early part of the month. But the real story unfolds as we look further out, toward the middle of the month and into Christmas week. You can see a major pattern shift here. Compare this to that everything stalls out. Now, this isn't a forecast. I repeat, not a forecast. So don't take this as gospel. Ultimately, I keep coming back to the MJO. We can discuss sudden stratospheric warming events all day long, but here's the key. That phenomenon will work in tandem with the MJO, meaning the specific phase we're in will likely determine where the cold air from the Arctic blocking pattern plunges south. So, let's take a look at the extended Euro model. And we have a fresh run of the data. Alright, for any new viewers, let's quickly break this down. I'll just resize this for better clarity. Let me get the right color coding here. There we go. Now, looking at this chart, phases 7, 6, 5, 4, and 3, these are predominantly warm phases for the US. So while these are considered the warm phases, I'll tell you, it's still possible to get shots of cold air, especially in phase 7, which we're heading into, and also in phase 3. However, phases 4, 5, and 6 typically mean widespread warmth across most of the country. Now, phases 8, 1, and 2 are our favorable cold and winter weather patterns. So, what's our current position and where are we headed? Okay, let me get back to the chart here. We are currently right in this jumbled area. If you look closely, you'll see 8 and 10, that's November 8th, and November 10th. Obviously, that's in the past. We're now on the 21st, and as you can see, the progression is getting quite tangled right in this zone, so we're stuck in this complex pattern for the next week. See this marker for the 25th? That's November 25th. And here's the 27th. The model shows us finally breaking out of this pattern. Not literally tangled, of course, but the chart shows a clear progression into phase 7. We're in phase 6 at the moment. So, by November 27th to the 29th, we transition. That 1 and 3 you see right here represent the 1st and 3rd of December. So, as we approach Thanksgiving, we begin our journey through phase 7 and into early December. Alright, so what does this mean? Phase 7 can support cold air intrusions into the lower 48, but it typically favors strong ridging in the east, especially the southeast. This aligns perfectly with what our current model guidance is showing. In fact, the agreement is quite strong. I'm quite impressed with how well the models are responding to the MJO forecast from the extended Euro. However, the forecast shows us moving through phase 7 much more quickly than our current linger in phase 6. This projection has us entering phase 8 by around the 5th of December. That is the prime phase in December for significant cold and winter weather, particularly for the central and eastern US. But then, the model shows us stalling out, bordering phases 7 and 8 for about 10 days to 2 weeks. We need a clean break. You see, notice how it shows the 17th to the 19th finally getting solidly into phase 8. We need a steady, not a stalled, progression through this phase. So, the models do show us entering that favorable phase about 1 week into December, but the question is, will it fully commit or just linger between phases 7 and 8? For you winter and cold weather enthusiasts, you're hoping for a slow progression through phase 8 and into phase 1 from December through the early portion of January. And there is a possibility of that happening, which is why I've noted the high potential for late December into early January. So, these are the favorable phases, particularly phase 8, and the data indicates we are heading in that direction. However, a complex situation is beginning to develop right here. Two things have changed with this forecast over the last week. First, we're moving through phase 7 much faster and approaching phase 8, but a new development is a complication emerging in this area. This makes the forecast quite challenging, folks. Very tough. Therefore, we'll have to monitor its progression closely. And speaking of, what these MJO phases mean for the temperatures we experience daily. If we look at the data, for October through December, phase 7 supports exactly what the current pattern is showing. Now, looking at phase 7, and I know the resolution on this is poor, it indicates much warmer temperatures across the southeast and the eastern US, with significant cold across the central and northern parts of the country. That aligns perfectly with what the ensemble guidance is showing. It's a remarkable correlation. Now, let's look at this next chart. This covers November, December, and January. Since December is the midpoint of the period we're about to enter, I believe this is the most relevant chart to display. And looking at Phase 8, if we can transition into it during December, it suggests widespread cold across the central to eastern U.S. That's the pattern needed to break down the persistent ridge, everyone. So, let's move into today's national forecast. A large area of rain is moving across the middle of the country. You can see it here. It is much-needed rainfall. A low-pressure system is situated over the central plains. We're seeing some snow tracking across the upper northeast with additional moisture further south. And a swirling cutoff low is lingering over Southern California. So that's the current setup. As we move on, we see widespread, dense fog across parts of the country, indicated by the gray-shaded counties and parishes. We also have flood watches posted in central Texas. Additionally, there are alerts across the West. We do have a risk of severe weather from Middle Tennessee down to Alabama and Mississippi for this afternoon and into the evening. Please stay weather aware. There is even a 2% tornado risk, so remain vigilant with any storms that develop. We'll have more on that in just a moment. Turning to the flash flood risk, it is generally low today, with the exception of Southern California, southwestern Arizona, and the southeast. We have widespread moisture moving in, bringing much-needed rain. Some of that rain will push into Kentucky and parts of Tennessee, followed by the development of thunderstorms. On the radar, you can see a slight hook signature on some of these storms in Mississippi, so please be on alert. As we head into the early afternoon, be on the lookout for widespread thunderstorms, particularly in Jackson, Meridian, and Hattiesburg. This storm activity will eventually track eastward into Alabama, reaching southern portions of Middle Tennessee later this evening. So, please stay weather aware today. As we look further north, some much-needed rain could push east of the Appalachian Mountains into the Carolinas and Virginia. Those areas can certainly use the precipitation, and we're also tracking ongoing thunderstorms across the Mid-South, continuing into the later evening hours. So, if you see rain in the forecast, it will be a welcome sight, because I know my own area hasn't seen any measurable rainfall since late October, and nothing at all for the month of November. And here we are on the 21st. Now, shifting to the northeast, we're seeing some snow, with festive flurries across northern Maine. Farther south, it's a bit too warm for any widespread snow, and there isn't much moisture for it to work with. In any case, we are tracking some moisture moving into southern Pennsylvania and New Jersey as you wake up tomorrow morning, affecting the greater Mid-Atlantic region. In the south-central U.S., we have moisture swirling over Kansas, southern Nebraska, and northern Missouri, which will eventually extend into Illinois. It's possible some additional thunderstorms could develop in eastern Texas later this afternoon as most of this energy begins to progress eastward. However, a lingering boundary over southeastern Texas could continue to promote some thunderstorm development, bringing heavy downpours to that part of the state. Now, looking at the north-central U.S., we do have some moisture bubbling up, but its northward advance is being somewhat suppressed, and it likely won't move very far north. But for those of you in the Mid-Atlantic, northern Missouri, and from central to southern Illinois and Indiana, and points south in Ohio, you can expect an area of moisture to surge through later tonight. Meanwhile, in the western U.S., we continue to see trapped energy spinning around. This will provide a steady feed of moisture into Southern California and the surrounding region. It's essentially a trapped, low-pressure system embedded within a larger ridge of high pressure. Looking at temperatures, the southern tier of the country is experiencing very warm conditions. In my opinion, the sharp temperature gradient will be a major storyline over the next 2 weeks, with the northeast remaining cold while the south stays warm. Here's a look at the temperature pattern across the West. That's the latest I have for you. Thank you for tuning in. We'll continue to track these systems as they develop. Stay safe, have a wonderful day, and we'll talk again soon.